The funeral hall was filled with a quiet sadness that pressed on everyone's chest. Soft light fell through the high windows and rested on rows of wooden chairs where people sat close together. The air smelled of flowers and incense, and every sound felt louder than it should. At the front of the hall stood a simple coffin, polished and closed, holding the body of a young man named Amon. Amon had been known as a calm and helpful person in his neighborhood. He worked hard, smiled easily, and never caused trouble. People still could not believe he was gone so suddenly. They had been told it was an accident on a dark road late at night. A truck, a sharp turn, and no time to react. The story sounded complete, yet something about it felt unfinished. Among the mourners stood a police officer named Ravi. He was not there as part of an investigation. He was there out of respect. Amon had once helped Ravi during a difficult time, and Ravi had never forgotten that kindness. Beside him stood his police dog Shadow, calm and alert, his dark eyes watching the room with quiet focus. Shadow was trained to remain still in crowded places. Funerals, ceremonies, and public events never bothered him. He understood silence and emotion in a way that surprised many people. Ravi trusted Shadow more than any tool or report. Over the years, the dog had saved lives by noticing what humans missed. As the service continued, the priest spoke gentle words meant to comfort the family. Mira, Amon's sister, sat in the front row holding her hands tightly together. Her eyes were dry, not because she felt nothing, but because the shock had drained all her tears. She kept staring at the coffin, trying to accept what her heart refused to believe. Shadow shifted slightly. Ravi felt it through the leash. At first, he thought the dog was just adjusting his position. Then Shadow stood up fully, his body tense, his ears raised. Ravi whispered a quiet command, expecting the dog to sit again. Shadow did not obey. A low sound came from Shadow's throat. It was not loud, but it was firm. Then the sound grew stronger and turned into a sharp bark that echoed through the hall. People turned their heads in surprise. The priest stopped speaking. The room froze. Ravi pulled the leash gently, trying to calm Shadow. The dog stepped forward instead, eyes fixed on the coffin. He barked again, louder than before. Some guests stepped back, fear crossing their faces. Others whispered in confusion, unsure of what they were seeing. Shadow had never behaved like this. Ravi's heart began to beat faster. Training told him to control the situation, but instinct told him to pay attention. Shadow's reactions were never random. They were signals. Mira stood up slowly. She looked from the barking dog to the coffin and then to Ravi. Her face showed confusion mixed with sudden hope. She asked Ravi what was happening. Ravi hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He said the dog was sensing something unusual. The hall filled with quiet murmurs. Some relatives shook their heads, calling it stress or coincidence. They said the dog was reacting to emotions or unfamiliar smells. Others stayed silent, watching Shadow closely. Shadow pulled harder now, moving closer to the coffin. His barking was steady, not wild. It sounded like a warning rather than fear. Ravi felt a cold feeling move through him. He remembered past cases where Shadow had acted the same way, moments before hidden truth came to light. Ravi asked the priest to pause the service. The request shocked everyone. Funerals were sacred moments, not to be interrupted. But Ravi's serious tone made people listen. He said he needed a moment to ensure there was no risk to anyone present. Mira walked toward the coffin, her hands trembling. She asked again what Shadow was trying to say. Ravi answered honestly. He said Shadow was trained to react when something was not right, when something did not match what it appeared to be. The words hung in the air. Something not right. Something not matching. Mira felt her breath catch. She remembered how quickly the coffin had been sealed. She remembered being told not to touch Amon's face because of injuries. At the time, grief had silenced her questions. Shadow stopped barking for a moment and sat down, staring at the coffin without blinking. The hall was silent again, but the silence felt heavier than before. Ravi knew this signal well. Shadow sat like this only when he was certain. Ravi asked for permission to move the coffin into a private room for inspection. The request caused arguments. Some family members protested loudly. They said Aman deserved peace. They said this was cruel. Others looked unsure, their faces pale with doubt. Mira raised her hand. Her voice was soft but steady. She said if there was even a small chance that something was wrong, she needed to know. She said she could not bury her brother while her heart was screaming questions. Ravi nodded and called his senior officer. The decision was made to pause the burial. The coffin was carefully lifted and moved away from the hall. Shadow walked beside it, calm now, as if he knew he was being listened to at last. People watched in stunned silence as the doors closed behind the coffin. No one spoke. No one cried. Fear, hope, and confusion mixed together in the air. Ravi looked at Shadow and placed a hand on his head. He whispered that if the dog was right, everything was about to change. Outside, the sun continued to shine, unaware of the moment unfolding inside. A funeral had turned into a question. A goodbye had become a pause. And a dog's bark had opened the door to a truth that refused to stay hidden. The private room felt colder than the funeral hall, and the silence inside it was sharp and heavy. The coffin rested in the center under bright white lights that showed every detail clearly. Ravi stood near it with Shadow sitting close by his side, calm but alert and focused on the closed lid. Mira entered the room slowly with two elders from the family following her. Their faces showed fear mixed with confusion and tired grief. No one spoke at first because words felt weak in that moment. The weight of what might be discovered pressed on every heart. Ravi explained carefully that this step was not taken lightly and that Shadow had shown strong signs that something did not match the situation. He said trained dogs reacted to signals humans could not sense easily. He reminded them that Shadow had never been wrong before. One of the elders crossed his arms and shook his head but did not stop the process. He said if the coffin was opened it must be done with respect and care. Ravi agreed and gave a short nod. The officer assisting Ravi unlocked the coffin slowly and lifted the lid with steady hands. The sound of the hinges felt loud in the quiet room. Everyone leaned forward slightly, holding their breath, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Aman lay inside dressed neatly with his hands folded across his chest. His face looked pale and still. For a few seconds nothing happened and doubt crept into the room. Some people lowered their eyes, feeling shame for stopping the funeral. Then Shadow stood up. He stepped closer to the coffin and sniffed the air near Aman's face and chest. His movements were careful and precise. He let out a short, sharp bark and then stopped again. His body stayed tense and focused. Ravi moved closer and looked carefully at Aman. He did not rush. He had learned that moments like this required patience. He leaned down and placed his fingers gently near Aman's neck. At first he felt nothing. Then he felt it. A faint, weak movement beneath his fingers. Ravi's eyes widened and his breath caught in his chest. He checked again, slowly, making sure his mind was not playing tricks on him. The pulse was still there, weak but real. Mira gasped and covered her mouth. Her legs felt unsteady and she grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. Tears rushed to her eyes, not from grief this time but from shock and sudden hope. Ravi immediately called for medical support and asked the assisting officer to bring oxygen. Shadow sat down beside the coffin, his task complete, his calm posture showing certainty. The room turned into motion. Voices rose, orders were given, and equipment was brought in quickly. Oxygen was placed and Aman's chest moved slightly with the aid. The change was small but visible enough to confirm the truth. Aman was alive. Doctors arrived within minutes and carefully transferred Aman to a stretcher. As they moved him, they explained that his condition showed signs of deep chemical influence that slowed his breathing and heart rate to dangerous levels. It was rare but not impossible to mistake it for death. Mira followed closely, holding on to hope like a lifeline. Her mind raced through memories and questions. She thought about the accident story and how fast everything had happened. She wondered who would want her brother silent. At the hospital, Aman was placed under close care. Machines monitored every movement and breath. Ravi stayed nearby completing reports and making calls. He knew this was no accident anymore. This was something planned. Shadow rested near the hospital door, watching quietly. Nurses and doctors noticed the dog with curiosity and respect. Ravi explained that Shadow had likely saved a life today. Some smiled, others simply nodded, knowing words were not enough. As hours passed, Aman's condition slowly improved. His breathing grew stronger and his pulse steadier. Doctors said he would need time, but they were hopeful. Mira sat beside his bed, holding his hand and whispering his name. Later that night, Aman opened his eyes. They moved slowly and unfocused at first, then settled on his sister's face. He tried to speak, but his voice was weak. Mira leaned close and told him he was safe now. Tears rolled down her face freely. Ravi entered the room quietly and stood at a respectful distance. He asked gentle questions once Aman was able to respond. Aman spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He said he remembered being followed before the accident. He remembered feeling dizzy after drinking water offered by a stranger. He said he had seen something he was not meant to see. Ravi listened carefully as Aman explained that he had witnessed a secret meeting involving people with power. He had recognized faces and heard plans that could hurt many others. He said he planned to report it, but never got the chance. The truth settled heavily in the room. This was not just about one man. It was about stopping something larger. Ravi promised Aman that he would be protected and that the truth would come out. As dawn approached, the hospital windows glowed with soft light. A funeral had turned into a rescue. Grief had turned into determination. And Shadow slept peacefully, knowing he had done what he was trained to do. Outside the hospital, the city continued its routine, unaware of how close it had come to losing a truth forever. But inside, one family held on to hope, and one officer prepared for justice to begin. The morning light slowly filled the hospital room and brought a quiet calm after the long night. Aman lay on the bed, breathing steadily, while machines nearby showed gentle movement. Mira sat beside him, holding his hand and watching his face as if afraid he might disappear again. Ravi returned to the hospital early, carrying files and a focused expression. He had not slept much, but his mind was clear. What happened at the funeral had changed everything, and now the truth had to be protected carefully. Aman was still weak, but his eyes followed Ravi as he entered the room. Ravi spoke softly and told him there was no hurry. He said every detail mattered and would be handled with care. Aman nodded slowly and began to speak again. His voice was low but steady. He said weeks before the accident he had noticed strange activity near his workplace. He worked at a storage yard where shipments arrived late at night. One evening he saw people unloading sealed boxes in a hidden section and heard serious conversations filled with fear and urgency. Aman said he did not understand everything, but he knew it was wrong. He recognized one man who was known in the city for influence and money. That moment stayed in his mind and made him uneasy. Days later, Aman felt he was being watched. He noticed unfamiliar faces near his home and felt uneasy whenever he walked alone. He tried to ignore it, hoping it was only his imagination. On the night of the accident, a stranger approached him with friendly words and offered him water. Aman said the taste was strange, and soon after his body felt heavy. His vision blurred and his strength faded. The next thing he remembered was darkness and silence. Ravi listened closely without interrupting. He noted every word and signaled another officer to document everything quietly. This was no simple case anymore. It was planned and dangerous. Mira felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at those who tried to silence her brother, and relief that he was alive to speak. She looked at Shadow resting near the door and felt deep gratitude toward the dog who had refused to accept the lie. Ravi arranged for Aman to be moved to a secure room under protection. Only trusted staff were allowed near him. The hospital cooperated fully, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Outside the room, Ravi made calls and shared information with his team. Surveillance footage was requested and names were cross-checked. Quiet steps were taken to avoid alerting anyone involved. As the day passed, investigators discovered inconsistencies in the accident report. The truck mentioned in the report did not exist. The location described did not match any recorded traffic data. The story began to fall apart quickly. Mira stayed with Aman and told him about the funeral and Shadow. Aman listened with disbelief and emotion. He said it felt like someone had pulled him back from the edge of darkness. He said he owed his life to a dog who trusted his instincts. Shadow was brought into the room briefly, and Aman placed his weak hand on the dog's head. Shadow wagged his tail softly and rested beside the bed. The moment felt quiet and powerful. That evening, Ravi received confirmation that the chemical found in Aman's system matched substances used to slow body functions deeply. It explained how his condition could appear lifeless without proper equipment. It also confirmed intent. Ravi knew this case would shake the city once revealed. He also knew it had to be handled carefully. Powerful people did not give up easily. Aman rested while officers stood guard nearby. Mira finally allowed herself to close her eyes for a short while knowing her brother was safe for now. Outside, the hospital, night returned quietly. The city lights glowed, unaware of the truth forming inside those walls. A false farewell had nearly succeeded, but loyalty and courage had stopped it. Ravi stood by the window and looked at Shadow lying calmly on the floor. He thought about how many times truth tried to hide and how often it needed a voice to be heard. In this case, the voice had barked. And the world was finally listening. The days that followed moved carefully and quietly as the investigation reached deeper layers. Aman stayed under protection while his strength returned slowly. Mira remained close, never leaving his side for long and watching every small improvement with relief. Ravi worked with a small trusted team to gather proof without creating noise. Records were checked, phone movements were traced, and quiet interviews were conducted. Each piece added weight to Aman's words and confirmed the plan to silence him. The truth slowly connected itself. The storage yard shipments were linked to hidden dealings. The meeting Aman had seen was real and powerful names were involved. The plan had been simple: make Aman disappear without questions and close the case fast. But plans failed when Shadow refused to stay silent. When Aman was strong enough, he gave a full statement again with clarity and calm. He spoke without fear because he knew he was no longer alone. Ravi made sure every word was protected and recorded properly. As evidence grew, warrants were approved quietly. Those involved were questioned one by one. Their confidence faded as facts replaced denial. The city began to feel a shift even before news reached the public. Mira noticed the change in the air. People spoke in softer tones around the hospital. Officers moved with purpose and respect. Aman felt it too. He felt that truth had weight, and it was finally being carried forward. Shadow continued his routine beside Ravi, as if nothing unusual had happened. He accepted gentle pats from staff and rested calmly during long hours. To him, it was simply another duty fulfilled. One morning, Ravi visited Aman with a calm smile. He told him that the case had reached a turning point. Those responsible were being held accountable and the hidden operation was being shut down. Aman closed his eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath he had been holding for weeks. The news reached Mira like warm light. She held Aman's hand and smiled through tears. The fear that had lived in her chest since the funeral finally loosened its grip. When Aman was discharged, the hospital staff gathered quietly to watch him leave. Not as a patient, but as a survivor. Ravi walked beside him and Shadow stayed close. Outside, the sky was clear and bright. The world felt different, not because it had changed, but because truth had been allowed to stay. Days later, a small ceremony was held at the police station. There were no loud speeches and no flashing cameras. Just gratitude and respect. Ravi received recognition, but he stood aside and placed his hand on Shadow's back. He said the real hero had 4 legs and a loyal heart. Amon spoke briefly and thanked everyone for listening when it mattered most. He said life had given him a second chance and he would use it with care. His words were simple, but they stayed with everyone present. Mira stood beside her brother, proud and peaceful. She knew loss had almost claimed them, but courage had answered instead. The coffin that once held fear was never used again. It remained a reminder not of death, but of truth nearly buried. A lesson that silence is not always still, and sometimes it speaks through loyalty. Shadow returned to his normal duties without change or pride. But those who knew the story never looked at him the same way again. They saw not just a dog but a guardian of truth. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. Amon began rebuilding his days step by step. Ravi continued his service with renewed purpose. Mira carried hope forward with quiet strength. And in the heart of the city, a story remained. A story where truth survived because someone listened when a bark broke the silence.